Welcome to Crushgasm, the podcast that's dedicated to the highs and lows of crushes, but this month we're crushing on something spooky, all things horror, from movies to books and a few things in between, and we're here with someone who will never turn down an evening at the movies, Kasey Box, a proud uncle, podcaster, and bookworm who's here to talk about a library's best friend, Stephen King. Kasey, how are you?
I am amazing. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation as well. I'm always happy to come talk about anything horror or anything King.
All right, but before we get into Stephen King and all that jazz, can you tell people where they can find you and your shows online?
You can find both of my shows on the I Did Not Make These Rankings Podcast Network website, which is created and maintained by the amazing hostess of the Crushgasm podcast, Miss Kendra. So definitely big shout out to her. But you can find both Literature Reapers and An Evening at the Movies wherever you get your podcast listening fix, Google, Spotify, Apple, wherever. An Evening at the Movies also can be found on our YouTube channel as well. So if you don't like to listen and want to watch, you can definitely watch. And there's a lot more stuff that you can see behind the scenes going on between myself and Amanda and Shanna, and sometimes some of our other guests we have some pretty illustrative guests who like to have meltdowns or can get worked up over certain topics. Chansey, Harvey, Dre, whoever the case may be. It's a great show. It's a great time. So if you need something entertaining to listen to, I highly recommend both Reapers and An Evening at the Movies, but definitely An Evening at the Movies.
Alrighty, we'll check those out anywhere he just said, and we'll list that below. And I'll ask you to repeat that at the end. You don't have to repeat it all, but I will ask you again at the end. So, when you first came on Crushgasm, we talked about your love of movies and whatnot, stemming from The Wizard of Oz, which I don't know about the book, but the movie does have some sort of scary elements with the witches and whatnot. But when would you say you sort of found yourself in the section of the bookstore and the library checking out like the horror section?
I believe, honestly, it was both were really close to the same time. That I think the first horror book that I actually picked up was Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I got that through one of those Scholastic like book things those newspaper like things that we all got in school.
Very nice.
So yeah, I got Dracula from there, and it was probably right about that same time that I think I picked up, it was either Carrie or Pet Sematary from the school library, which is rather interesting because Carrie is one of those books that if you look at like the banned book list that schools have put out, is generally one of the ones that goes right to the top of the list because it has an essence of bullying and strong subject matter that can be very disturbing for younger people who may not necessarily be emotionally ready for that type of subject matter.
Yeah, it is a pretty dark book to have at like maybe if it's a like city library, they can't really take it. It was your school library though?
7th grade.
Well, this was, to date you, it was a while ago before they started banning everything.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was literally like 1989, 90. Okay. So, yeah, it right in that window of people like Kendra and Dre joining the world. The rest of us were all living the dream and going out and doing that. But even Pet Sematary, though, isn't necessarily a book that may not be appropriate for kids that age either. So,
yeah, but you read as long as you're reading, that's the important thing. But was Stephen King sort of the first author you found yourself going back to again and again?
I would put him probably in the top 3 or 4. Definitely, I remember as a kid rereading and reading multiple times, like The Wonderful Wizard of Oz and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as well by Roald Dahl. Yeah, I think King probably after those two would probably be the first one that I really found myself going back to over and over and over again. And some of those books I've read at least double digit numbers of times. So not necessarily the ones that have like 1,300, 1,400 pages, but
It. I have to admit, I've only read, other than Dr. Seuss books, I've only read maybe one or two books a second time. And I remember Charlotte's Web was the first one that I dipped my toe in again. I thought it was great. But, back to Stephen King, he is the modern day master of what he does due to like the countless movies and series his writings have spawned. And his name is probably one of the most well known when it comes to authors. But years from now, many, many years from now, when kids are in English class and they're learning about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and like Bram Stoker's Dracula, what Stephen King book do you think will be among those kind of horror classics that they study in school?
yeah, that's a really, really good question. You definitely did your homework for this episode, Kendra. Like the classics of King. I mean, you can't really get away from books like The Shining
Mm-hmm.
or Carrie or Misery, stuff like that. Even though a lot of the subject matter in those books is definitely not necessarily appropriate until you start to get into like the high school years. But I mean, at the same time, you can't deny the fact that he's had such a prolific career.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the guy's got not not necessarily close to 100, but he's in that, above, upper 60s, mid 70s in that window. I don't remember exactly what the number is, but he's got a ton of books out there. And I think about the only other author in America that can say that they've got as much or more publications than him is probably James Patterson.
Mm-hmm. For books that long, because let's
And
not discount Anne and Martin from Babysitter's Club and R.L. Stein from Goosebumps, but their books are a very big font and have about 20 pages. So it's not that hard to write.
true. Yes. And there's definitely nothing against those because especially when it comes to kids, especially nowadays, in my opinion, you've got to have something that you can put out there that's going to get them hooked into the literature world.
Mm-hmm.
And so that when they get to that age, they can move on to stuff like Patterson, King, whoever,
Mm-hmm.
as an adult, even like the Harry Potter books. But yeah, I mean,
Well, I think they're going to study not only his writing, but how he wrote too. And like Stephen King, you're a writer as well. He started around 6 or 7, but what about you?
I remember this, again, very good question, because this is a topic that I plan on bringing up on our next episode of Literature Reapers as well. So definitely tune in for that episode if you're listening. But I won't go into all the details on that. But I started writing probably just little like childish type stuff, 9-10 years old, but then probably 13-14 starting to delve into like shorter stories and poetry. The idea of writing a novel has been very intimidating, so it's not really something that I've truly tried to conquer up until recently. But I've got 3 or 4 different ideas running around in my head right now, and especially with my current situation, I find myself with the abundance of time, so maybe it's a good time to dip my foot in the water and see about possibly getting some of that stuff completed and maybe living the dream and attempting to get some of that stuff published as well.
Well, there you go. 13. Yeah, that's about when I started like really writing. I would say like I knew there's a difference between running to write and like feeling that I could. I always credit my 10th grade English teacher with like showing me. She actually cried after reading one of my assignments and she came over and hugged me. And I thought, that is pretty amazing that I just wrote these words on a page and this woman is crying. That's pretty cool. So I knew at that moment, I was like, I think I can do this. But how has Stephen King's approach to writing and his take on horror, thrills, and the supernatural inspired you in your writing?
For me, probably the biggest portion of his style that I really truly love is he's one of those writers that you can spend however, it doesn't really matter the size of the book that you jump into, and you can spend, you can read one of those 14,000 or 1,400 page epics, or you can read something that's 300-400 pages. Doesn't matter. But you can go through an entire King book and expect things, but then when you get to the end, you almost always get some kind of weird, twisted plot twist at the end.
Hmm. I think
So,
that's where R.L. Stein gets his influence, because he always has that
mhm,
twist.
yeah, and it it it's very entertaining and engaging, because if you can do it and do it well, it keeps your writers or your readers, not writers, on their toes, so they don't know what's coming at the end of the book. And when you've got, like I said, 60, 70, however many books that you published,
Hmm.
it can get kind of hard at times to keep those twisted endings from getting stale.
Hmm. And what would you say he writes best? Is it like the scarier stuff or like the more supernatural?
Personally, for me, I'm a bigger fan of like his more horror stuff. But and like Amanda and I and a couple other people have had this discussion before. There's like three distinct eras of King's writing. You have the pre-rehab days where he was an alcoholic and on cocaine,
Hmm.
which is where most of his horror stuff comes. And then you have the post-rehab days where you get a little bit more of the supernatural stuff. And then you have the post-van accident that almost killed him, where now you're starting to get more into his like realistic stuff. It's not necessarily as much horror and or supernatural. But for me, it'll always come back to the horror, because the horror is what grabbed me and brought me in to begin with. There isn't much of his stuff that I don't like and can't stand. There's stuff that I don't care for as much as others, but definitely if you put an array of books of his in front of me and asked me to gravitate towards one specific genre, it's going to be the classic OG horror.
Oh, my husband's also a big Stephen King fan. We have a lot of books on our shelves of his. I should have asked him that question. I've never asked him. Almost 10 years together. Never cared to ask him, what's your favorite type? Maybe I'll ask him tonight at dinner. So I was sitting here when I was doing these questions, and I was like, I could never be scared or moved by the way something is written down. Like, I could never get scared by a horror book. I don't think I could. But then I read those like horror meme accounts where they like tell you a whole scary story, and I was like, well, I lied to myself. I definitely could be scared by the written word. But I want to get your 2 cents on what you think Stephen King does well, that he is able to scare and titillate audiences with these like various arrangements of the alphabet, aka the written word, because I think you have to be a master of the craft to evoke emotion
Oh,
over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I think, in my opinion, honestly, what he does really well that helps create that level of fear is also something he does it well, but then it's also one of the big deterrents that people will complain about with him, is the fact that he's very incredibly wordy and descriptive with his stuff, sometimes overly.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see if you're not necessarily a fan of that style, that may be too much for you. But when you're sitting here and you've got a blank canvas in front of you, for writers that would be a laptop or typewriter or notebook or whatever. A painter, it would be like a piece of canvas that you're slapping paint on. The more you can be out there and the more tools you use, the more elaborate and vibrant the picture is going to be. And to me, when you can get really descriptive with your words, that just gives a clear picture in the writer's or in the reader's mind as mm-hmm. to what you're trying to convey. And when it comes to things like, a evil, vicious clown living in the sewers, terrorizing a bunch of 12-year-olds, mm-hmm. It's obviously not something that you can just walk up and down the street and see every day. True. So maybe you can, depending upon what sick, twisted society you live in.
Well,
but
there was that one year that all those clowns were like chasing people. What was it, 2013 or something? 2016. It was a weird time. But yeah, go ahead.
2017 because it coincided with the release of the It remake,
Oh, do you think it
which
was
I
marketing?
I well, I don't know if it was marketing, but I think it was inspired. I think it inspired the Wackadoos, and
Oh.
it really started because it started probably 3 or 4 or 5 months before the movie came out, and it really started to scare me as to whether or not I thought, you know, it could hurt the release of the movie
Mm,
because that movie was something I was looking forward to seeing because it had been hyped for so long.
Did you like that movie?
The 2017 part one, yes.
Yeah. Yes.
2019, not so much.
I love Bill Hader, so I'm a little biased, but it felt like I don't like when movies are like a bunch of things, like we're having to do I don't know, it just felt too jumbled. Like there was like, we have to figure this out and they were all broken apart. I just didn't like that aspect. I did like Bill Hader, but yeah, I'll take the original one with the 2017 one.
Yeah, for me, that second part, Bill Hader probably was the one brief. Well, Bill Hader and Bill Skarsgård, because
hmm
I got to give that guy credit. When I heard that he was the one that was being cast to play Pennywise, I
hmm
had not one good thought in my head because I, again, am in my mid to late 40s, so I grew up with Tim Curry and
hmm
his version, and that's one of, you can't duplicate that kind of genius work. But at the same time, I big time hats off to Bill for the fact that he made that character his own and didn't. If he did copy off of Tim Curry, it wasn't a whole lot of copying. He really made the character his own. So Bill Skarsgård and Bill Hader probably were the two bright shining points of that movie.
hmm
But those big thick books like It and The Stand and even Under the Dome, those are hard to do because there's so much in there. You got to really worry about, is there anything extra that we can get rid of, or are we going to try and do bit by bit everything? And you can't do everything because you're going to lose your audience. But Stephen King fans are hardcore enough that you can't cut anything out because as soon as you cut something, they're going to go crazy and start rioting.
They're just, well, I want to know who are some of your other favorite authors that fall in line with King? His son, like Joe Hill, Dean Koontz, James Flynn, and I have to say the last one was an author who came on this show to talk about his movie crush on Mallory Knox. So I just wanted to give him a quick shout out. But yeah, who are some of your other favorite authors that can scare their readers?
Definitely a big, huge shout out to Joe Hill. For those of you who don't know, doesn't have the same quote unquote last name, but he is the spawn of the subject of this episode of Crushgasm. He is the son of Stephen King. So King has two kids, Owen and Joe. To me, Joe Hill is definitely the heir apparent to Mr. King's throne, who, when we're recording this episode, probably weeks ago by the time it actually drops, but Mr. King will be turning 76 on the 21st of September. So definitely, by the time this airs, happy late 76th birthday to him. So his days are fewer and fewer, and it looks like, the mantle will be picked up by Joe. But definitely Joe Hill. As far as others, though, and not necessarily just specifically in the horror, well, Anne Rice is another good horror writer as well that I highly encourage people to definitely pick up and check out. But at the same time, also, I want to give a big, huge shout out to a couple published authors that have come on An Evening at the Movies a couple of times. And that's Meg Halfdahl and Kelly Florence. Meg has a couple of books that she's published, the Willoughby Chronicles and Twisted Reveries, and her and Kelly both have also published a series of books called The Science of Monsters, Science of Women in Horror, Science of Stephen King. Even, definitely check their stuff out. They're doing great stuff as well. So, but those are some of the other writers that have me salivating to pick up new books at the drop of a dime. So,
And like yourself, Stephen King, he's noted that when he was growing up, he was very into movies, and he once said that he has a tendency to write in images. This is probably why so many of his works have translated so well to the big screen and the small screen. What was the first adaptation of his that you remember seeing?
Wasn't even a horror movie. It was in sixth grade. I saw Stand By Me. In my opinion, I've heard people that say it's not for them or whatever the case may be, and I get that, so I won't necessarily hate on people for saying that. But to me, that movie is the novella was incredibly well written. The movie adaptation was almost spot on accurate for an adaptation because let's be honest, most of his stuff doesn't adapt from book to screen well, but we won't hate on that. But it's an incredible story, coming of age, 4 kids going out into the world to go find a missing kid slash dead body, and them coming of age and standing up to a gang of probably 17, 18-year-old bullies. And it's a great story. There's great performances in the movie. Will Wheaton, Jerry O'Connell, Corey Feldman, even, who some people will classify as a wackadoo. It was the first time I ever saw Kiefer Sutherland in anything, and immediately thereafter fell in love with Kiefer. Like, Kiefer is like one of my man crushes. Like,
Really?
I would love to sit down and have a beer and talk with him. He seems like a really chill, relaxed dude. But yeah, Stand By Me is a great movie, and I highly recommend if anybody hasn't seen it, go pick it up. And well, you don't even have to go pick it up. Most of his stuff now you can find streaming online, especially this time of year. You can find it
Yeah.
streaming.
Yeah, Stand By Me was the first one I had seen too. I didn't even know it was associated with him. I think it was probably on like TBS or TNT one weekend when I was like in middle school. And I love coming of age movies. It's my favorite genre. So I was like anything with like, I like when kids go on adventures. I'm like a big Goonies fan. That's why Stranger Things like caught me. Like I like it because like, kids solving shit, like especially if they're gonna go ride a bike somewhere. I'm like, that's my shit right there. But What book of his do you think should be made into a TV adaptation that hasn't yet? Like, would make a good series, like a series. They don't last as long, so we'll say 3 to 4 seasons.
Probably the one that I'm screaming for the most. Okay, I have 2 answers to this question, and I'll make them both really quick so that I don't get on a soapbox with this, because one is a true Stephen King fan dream, and that would be for the Dark Tower novels to get adapted to TV, because they're one of his, it's basically his masterpiece, magnum opus, his masterpiece. And the movie in 2017 was not done well at all. No offense to Matthew McConaughey and Idris Elba, but that movie was hot garbage. The easy answer is definitely the Dark Tower. The other one would be the Talisman, which is kind of sort of along the same lines as the Dark Tower, but definitely more condensed into, right now, 2 decent sized books. But if you're looking for like a good 3-4 season thing that you could adapt, definitely the Dark Tower would fit, or not the Dark Tower, the Talisman and Black House would fit into that window pretty well, I think, if you get the right people on board to do it. And right now, Steven Spielberg actually owns the rights to the Talisman, and it is one that they are working towards, but they've been working toward. He's owned the rights to the movie or to the book for almost 40 years.
Oh wow!
So, yeah, it's one of those, like when the Dark Tower finally came out. It's like we've been waiting for it for a long time, so we're happy if it comes, but we're not holding our breath either at this point because it's been that long. So
yeah. You're not like holding your breath on it, but you'd hope for it. So what would you say would be your Mount Rushmore of Stephen King books? Like the 4 books that are it for you? No pun intended, it.
It actually would be one of them. It's a great, in a lot of ways, it's a more horrific version of Stand By Me. You get that supernatural character, Pennywise, but yet you also get the coming of age stuff with the Losers Club. After that, for anybody who knows me, knows that I will go directly to my emotional cutter movie and that or book, which is The Green Mile.
Mhm.
It's an incredibly well done performance by Tom Hanks, an incredibly insanely well done performance by Michael Clark Duncan. Rest in peace. You definitely a great movie and book both. The other two, I would probably go directly to The Shining and Misery. Both are for different types of horror. You have like your paranormal, like haunted house, but hotel. In The Shining, you've got an injured writer crippled in a psycho lady's bed. In Misery, I mean, as a writer, that would be like a great, big, huge fear of mine would be, you know, getting kidnapped by somebody and held hostage and being fed pills and being hobbled by a sledgehammer or an axe or whatever the
Mhm.
case may be. Because the big difference in those book and the movie is the axe in the book and the movie it's a sledgehammer. So, but Dre definitely does not like the
Sledgehammer.
hobbling.
And we all know that Hollywood loves to remake a lot of the movies, you know, and a few of Stephen King's have been remade, like it. But what do you think is one that would benefit from a remake? That maybe an older movie that didn't do as well.
Mm, ironically, um, are you like keeping in my other chats with other people that we podcast with? Because literally, Chancey and I were just talking about this like 20 minutes before we started recording. Um, there is a tremendously horrible adaptation that's out there that is not The Dark Tower, but it is called The Lawnmower Man. That was
Mm.
a, in my opinion, and you know, if listeners out there like it, I won't shame you for it, but I hate this freaking movie. And I think it was a horrible adaptation. But I think with today's technology, and if you find the right director and the right studio to do it, and you have a desire to do it faithfully, it could be an amazing movie as well. So if Hollywood is definitely interested in making a remake after the stupid ass writer strike gets over, I
Mhm.
venture the idea out there that definitely examine the idea of doing the Lawnmower Man.
And like you said, Stephen King is 76 this year, but he's still going, still publishing books. Do you think he's ever going to just retire? Like, do you think he has like a final swan song he'll write before he's through that he's been sitting on?
This is actually one of the very first Stephen King topics that Amanda and I talked about. So, because it's one of those things that, like, when COVID started, where or whenever a big time, like when Betty White passed away, the joke between her and I was somebody better get their ass up to Maine and put him on lockdown and put him away. So, you know, the bad vibes or the Reaper can't get to him because we know good and heck well that he's not young. And like I said earlier, his days are fewer and fewer. Um, it's one of those questions that we wonder. I mean, does he have a swan song in him, or does he have like a trunk stashed away in his attic somewhere of unpublished stuff that he'll tell his wife and kids, hey, after I'm gone, just go ahead and keep throwing this out to the publisher. If people will buy it, you guys aren't going to be hurting for money.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I mean, to me, that almost seemed like a cheap, tongue-in-cheek way to go. I would like to see him have that one last swan song, I think, and ride off into the sunset. He's not hurting financially at all. His
Yeah.
books are always going to be adapted, made into TV, made into movies, whatever the case may be. So, you know, even if he were to retire with like his next book, he still will have plenty of money to live on for the rest of his life, and probably even after that. He deserves to have that one shining moment because he's one of those iconic members of an elite club that, you know, how many people can say that they're as recognizable over the course of 40, 50 years like he can.
And in the way, like authors, for sure.
Yeah, oh, definitely, because
we're not a literate country, America. So yeah, if you can get your name out there to Americans, kudos.
that we're, especially nowadays with technology and all of that, the printed work is definitely slowly starting to disappear. I remember even going into stores like Walmart or places like that where they had huge, like a 2-aisle book section or whatever, and now it's like literally like half an aisle, and even that, it's like most of your books are James Patterson, Daniel Steele, Stephen King, whatever. It's basically the mainstream big names. If you're struggling to get out there author, you're not going to get sold in places like Walmart or whatever your corporate entity is for retail in your community.
And before we move on to some popcorn questions, well, they're not popcorn, the wheel of spooky death questions, what do you think the world of horror would look like without Stephen King's influence on both literature and movies and TV?
I don't necessarily think the world of horror would per se be hurting without King being a part of it. There are obviously a wealth of great directors and other writers that have helped fuel the genre, whether it's Anne Rice or authors like that, or directors like John Carpenter or Wes Craven or whoever. I mean, there's plenty of talent out there to keep the genre alive, but definitely I feel like Stephen King helped. He came out at that same time where John Carpenter was just getting going as a director. Wes Craven was exploding on the scene as a director, and I think as a group, all those people from that early to mid 70s era really came together to help create the perfect storm of exploding horror literature and movies into the pop culture world and help make it as big as what it is today. I think if you take away too many entities from that perfect storm, yeah, it probably is lessened, but horror is something that definitely people are always big fans of the adrenaline rush that you get from being scared. So, I mean, yeah, definitely horror would still be here, but
it'd be a little less.
Just a tad.
Just a little bit.
Just a tad. Yeah.
So now it's time for some spooky Wheel of Death questions. All right, I spun the wheel beforehand because that wheel takes a long time to spin, so I didn't want to spin it while we were talking. So I did beforehand. So the first, we have 6 of them. I wanted to stay spooky, like 666 for Halloween. But what is the best horror movie death?
Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1, Johnny Depp's death.
Oh,
hands down. I don't care what Amanda says. She knows I am one. Well, this sucks because there's actually 2 in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise that I can go back and forth on. But I'm a bigger Johnny Depp fan, so we'll go with Johnny Depp's death in the original, where he gets sucked into the bed and then the volcano of blood that comes out of the bed.
All right.
Seeing that as a kid,
I can imagine. Yeah, my brother was a stereotypical metalhead into horror, and he would try to make me watch all those things when I was just a little kid. We're 12 years different, so he's a lot older, and I was like, nah, man, that's cool. I'm cool on that. I didn't watch it till I was a lot older. No, not at 5 years old. Yeah, I barely got into Chuck. I think Bride of Chucky is what pulled me in, because I was like, oh, it could be funny. This is hilarious. Now I love Chucky. He's my boo.
Yeah, definitely. Once you get to the Bride of Chucky, that series definitely took a more less horrific, more comical.
Even the first week, I just watched the first one a couple weeks ago with my husband, and I was like, it's so funny. I mean, she's fighting a doll. Come on.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is the worst horror movie franchise?
I'm not as big a fan of like the torture porn type of stuff. So, I mean, I could easily go with Friday the 13th, but I think Friday the 13th has elements that deserve its recognition. Where, like the Saw franchise, though, you have a couple of great movies in the franchise, but after that, it really becomes the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And now they're literally, again, depending upon when this episode releases, days away from the 10th movie in the franchise. It's like, on people, let it be over.
Let it go, like Frozen. Let it go, let it go. So
Yes,
our next
exactly.
one is a fuck, marry, kill between Dracula, Frankenstein, and the iconic werewolf in the Universal Pictures.
So we will definitely kill off the she-wolf, which we'll call the Wolfman, because I'm not trying to fuck or marry something that could literally rip me to shreds. We'll go with Mary, the Bride of Frankenstein. So that one definitely seems like more realistically like wholesome portion. But at the end of the day, the one that I know it might be a little TMI, but vampires are OMG. I'll leave it at that. But definitely a female vampire / Dracula. Definitely fuck.
What do you think is the best genre of horror? Like you mentioned the torture porn, not for you, but like the supernatural, the like the strangers type stuff. Like what the slashers. What's your favorite?
That's a hard question, honestly, because other than torture porn, almost every other aspect of horror I absolutely love, whether it's paranormal, supernatural. Some people classify movies like Silence of the Lambs as a horror movie. I don't necessarily, but if you want to, I'll even throw like the true crime type horror stuff like Silence of the Lambs in there. Slashers are great. Just straight up horror movies like Dracula, Frankenstein, stuff like that, I love as well. The one for me that probably is my comfort zone go-to genre, though, probably would have to be the slashers, though, because that's where, for lack of a better term, I cut my teeth on getting into the horror genre. And as far as movies go, that it was Nightmare on Elm Street for me first and foremost, followed by Halloween and Friday the 13th almost at the same time. So, and those are probably the three most iconic slasher movies. I don't care what anybody says. And you can argue which one is number one and which one is number two, but even number three. But, those are the three slashers, and they're the end-all be-all of slasher movies, and they deserve all the love and respect for what they did for slash. Without those three movies, there would be no Scream, honestly, in my opinion. People can argue with me and debate it all they want, but I will stand my ground.
And speaking of love and respect, what is a horror movie character you feel deserved better?
Jason Voorhees. That, to me, this is why I put Friday the 13th at number 3 behind Nightmare on Halloween. Freddy and Michael Myers had all the love and respect that they got from fans. Friday the 13th had a good jumping off point, but then after generally number 5, that entire franchise went in the garbage really quickly and didn't come back. And there's so much more that they could have done with that if Hollywood and the writers had not tried to throw shit at the wall and see what stuck. I know this one kind of upsets people, but like Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Oh my God.
It sounds like he's going to like be an actor or something.
Well, it's literally they're on a boat going from wherever Crystal Lake is to New York City, and they're on the boat for an hour and 10 minutes of an hour and 25-minute long
Oh
movie.
no.
So it's not even necessarily about him taking Manhattan. It's like, I pop up and kill a couple people in Manhattan, and then they kill me and send me off to my temporary death before I come back for Friday the 13th Part 9. And in fact, it really wasn't a good movie at all to begin with. But the one thing I will say for that movie, hashtag, it does get credit for shouting out Stephen King in the beginning of the movie. One of the main characters is an aspiring writer, and she's gifted a pen that supposedly Stephen King had used to write his first novel with. He typewritered Carrie, but potato.
Potato. So, who is an actor? This is our last one. Who is an actor you'd love to see in a horror movie that hasn't jumped into that genre quite yet?
Damn. You want to go big or go home with your last one, don't you?
The Wheel of Spooky Death.
You're the wheel of spooky questions. So while I'm trying to think, I'm just going to preface my answer with, I think for any actor trying to break into the business, being in a horror movie in some capacity is a great tool to help you develop as an actor. So personally, in my opinion, I think everybody who wants to be an actor should be in a horror movie at some point, or if you're lucky enough, hopefully get your own franchise. But I'm going to go kind of a little bit older and not necessarily as young. Let's go with Reese Witherspoon. Unless there's one that's really out there that's not coming to the front of my head. It's a genre I don't think she's as much dabbled in. She's more of a rom-com-y type actress who, if she's going to be in a rom-com, damn it, she should have been in My Girl.
Well, I actually don't know if the age is what. I don't know her age with the Anna Klumskis.
Yeah, she's probably a little bit older because I think Reese and I are more at the same age. Well, Anna Klumsky, I think her and Macaulay were probably about 7, 8, 9 years younger. But yeah, I'll go ahead and go with Reese as somebody who I would like to see jump into the genre and see what she can do. I mean, she's a very talented actress, and that's one of the reasons why she's the subject of the chaos bracket that we're doing on Evening at the Movies currently.
Reese Witherspoon, all right. Well, they're only 5 years apart. She's Anna is 42 and Reese is 47. Well, yeah, from what Google says. So she could have played maybe a older person, maybe in the My Girl universe.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, too, technically, I'm also from the era that grew up on 90210.
Yeah.
And 98% of that cast was way older than what high school age is.
Yeah, for sure.
No offense, rest in peace, Luke Perry, but Luke Perry was not a teenager when he was in 90210.
But he was so handsome. I have an unopened Dylan McKay puzzle I found at a Goodwill, and it's one of my most prized possessions.
I'm not going to you girls can have your heartthrob crushes on Luke, but I will say with 100% certainty, out of everybody on that show, Luke Perry is the one person as a teenager I wanted to grow up to be, because I thought Dylan McKay was so freaking cool. Even when he was going through his broody emo drug phase, I still wanted to be Dylan McKay.
He was so cool. Definitely, like, if you had like a coolest characters like draft, Dylan McKay would be there.
Hey, that's not a bad idea.
So before we go, can you remind people where they can find you and Literature Reapers and An Evening at the Movies online?
Yep, definitely, really quickly. Both Literature Reapers and An Evening at the Movies can be found wherever you get your podcast listening fix. Spotify, Google, Apple. An Evening at the Movies is on YouTube. You can find both shows on wherever on social media, basically all you have to do is search for the name of both shows. We are working on getting Literature Reapers a Twitter account, X account, whatever you want to call it. So stay tuned for that as well. We will keep everybody updated on that if Twitter is slash X is your preference. But as well, like I said earlier in the opening, definitely if you don't want to go that direction and just want to go website direction, I highly recommend checking out the personal creation and well-maintained website that Kendra has designed for the I Did Not Make These Rankings podcast network, www.idnmtrpodcastnetwork.com. There's great information on that website, and it gets updated with each and every new show that comes out each and every week. So definitely hats off to our favorite Crushgasm host for how much hard work she puts into maintaining that website for us and all of our devoted, loyal listeners and disciples. So thank you very much, Kendra, for what you do.
Thank you. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about Stephen King in our Spooky Crush Month. And everyone, you can find all of Kasey's information below. And until next time, as always, keep crushing it and stay spooky.
Crushgasm is part of the I Did Not Make These Rankings podcast network, alongside some other pretty cool shows, including An Evening at the Movies, Crime, Rewind, Literature Reapers, Love is Black, Masturbators, Men Are the Prize, and The Sibless. You can find all of us and more over at idnmtrpodcastnetwork.com.